At me and I says, relatives of yours? She says, yeah, in-laws. So anyway, again, I appreciate you inviting me here. I'm a hay producer, and I assume this room is mostly hay producers, and that's what we've been doing for the last 35, 40 years. That's my whole adult life. That's what we've done. And we're not from a farming family. My parents didn't farm, my grandparents didn't farm, but since a kid, I've always loved farm equipment and always wanted to farm, but knew I never could. And I finally got an opportunity in our early 20s to start. So, and I'll talk more about that later in the program. But this is our home farm here, and we started out here in 1991. But I want to talk about things that work in our operation. And this is stuff that works in our operation, in our area, for our target market. So we make small square bales for the horse market, and we're trying for the premium horse market. So some of the things we're doing, you wouldn't necessarily want to do for cattle. Or you wouldn't want to spend that kind of money if you're trying to make just cattle hay. But if we're trying to make the premium market, we're spending what we have to spend to try to make the best quality hay we can, and for the type of hay we're making. So these are things that I'm going to go over, are things that work for me. It doesn't mean they'll work for you. I'd like you to consider some of the ideas and stuff. But we have a different soil type than you guys do. We're a heavy clay. We've got about 8 or 10 inches of topsoil, and then we're a heavy clay underneath it. And our ground holds a lot of moisture. We were actually the Great Black Swamp back in the day. We're well tiled and stuff now, so we're handling the water. But we retain moisture sometimes. I mean, it's great sometimes when you get into dry weather, but when you're trying to get hay dry, that retaining the moisture in the ground can be a bit of a problem. So anyway, everything we bale is in the small square bale. I'll just kind of go over some of the things that we're doing and why we're doing it. I'm a strong believer in self-propelled hay binds. Somebody told me that 20 years ago, that I was actually looking at a hay dryer 20 years ago, and this guy started asking me about my operation. He said, you need to solve a lot of your other issues before you even consider a hay dryer. He said, you need to go to self-propelled. You need to have better, I was using roller bar rakes at the time. You need to go to better rakes. All kinds of things that he said you need to accomplish before you can even consider a hay dryer. And he was right. If I'm not driving on that swath and smashing that tire track, I'm smashing that hay right down against the wet soil, we are gaining a lot just by going self-propelled. We use full contact conditioner rolls. So those are aftermarket rolls in our hay binds, and if you're not familiar with them, they're highly machined, they're precision machined so that you can run them tight together. So when the hay's going through those rolls, it doesn't have a 16th or an 1/8 inch gap between them. It's tight together, and you can adjust your pressure either hydraulically or air, depends on what system you put on. But we absolutely feel that that's gaining us a half a day to a day most of the time. So they're expensive, but for the type of hay we're trying to make and the market we're trying to satisfy, the aftermarket rolls are very worthwhile. We run 13-foot hay binds. We run 3 of them because I believe you want to get the hay on the ground at least as fast as you can get it baled. I used to run 1 and then 2, and we ended up going 3 because as we started getting more balers, we would get halfway across or 3/4 of the way across the field, and all of a sudden we're running into higher moisture hay because it took us, say, 6 hours to cut the field, but we're baling it in 3. So I want to be able to knock the field down at least as fast as my balers can bale it. So we run 3 of them, and we run 13-foot cut. And I'm a very strong believer in 13-foot cut, and that's probably contrary to what a lot of guys think. Why don't you grow up and get a big machine? It's very important to me. My hay bind will lay out a swath, and you can see it 8.5 foot wide, and it's leaving a 4-foot space between the swaths. And I know that's only 12.5 foot, but realistically, that's what you're cutting. You're really not cutting 13 foot, or we aren't. Maybe you drive better than I do. But anyway, I want to keep that 4-foot space between the swaths until I rake my hay. And that doesn't mean I don't ted, but I do it a little bit differently than a lot of areas. It's important to me to save that space between the swaths and lay it out as wide as I possibly can. So with a 13-foot cut, I'm getting 68% exposure to the sun. So 68% of what I've laid down is exposed to the sun. If I go to 16-foot cut, I'm down to 55% exposure to the sun. And you hear a lot about you need to maximize your exposure to the sun, but I personally believe that's a little bit overemphasized. And so, you know, everybody ted your hay out, spread it way out so that you're getting maximum exposure to the sun. But I believe in also getting some of that ground dried out so I can rake hay onto it. So again, maximize exposure to the sun. But I think what needs to be talked about and emphasized even more is maximize the air circulation in the swath. And so if you can get that hay up in the air and get air through it, that's a big advantage versus only the sun. The sun is really what's bleaching the hay. The moisture and the sun, a combination of it. But the hay doesn't bleach if it's not exposed to the sun. And of course I've got exposure to the sun, but not as much as if it's completely laid out. So I want you to imagine with a rotary tedder, you're basically turning your field into what this guy's done when he strawed his lawn. And they all do it, we all do it. The idea behind this is to retain the moisture in the soil. But if you spread everything out on the ground, now you've got no dry space to rake your hay on if your ground is holding moisture. And I keep saying yours. This is what I'm talking about in our area, not you guys. Whether you guys are the same or not, I don't know. If you've got a lot of rock and stuff below your surface and it dries out with it being strawed or with it being rotary tedded, maybe this doesn't apply to you, but maybe it does and maybe you don't realize it. So anyway, if you can understand that we're completely shading the ground when we rotary ted, you don't have dry space to rake onto. So years ago, I was driving through Amish country and I seen an Amishman pulling one of these. This happens to be a PTO drive, but he was pulling a ground-driven fluffer behind a team of horses. And it was like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So I bought one, started using it, and I was very happy with it. Eventually I bought two, and I was pulling two of them at a time with a double rake hitch, and it was working really good. But as we grew our operation, we found that maximum speed on this is 4.5 to 5 miles an hour. That's for me. If you go any faster than that, it's doing a bunchy, it's kind of bunching the hay up. That's a 4-bar reel. And if you go any faster than that, it wants to self-destruct. So you actually pull this out of gear to pull it down the road and stuff. But it's not made, it's truly made by the Amish for the Amish. It was never made for commercial production. So I called the company and, you know, are you guys gonna do anything as far as updating this? I believe if you go to a 6-bar reel, we could go faster. If we went hydraulic drive, we could adjust our speed accordingly. And the manufacturer said, no, this fluffer is going to go by the wayside. The rotary tedder is the wave of the future. And it's just like, you don't see what I'm seeing. So anyway, and just a couple of years ago, some friends and I were driving across Illinois to look at some, we were going to see another hay guy. And we seen a guy pulling these doubles, and we turned around. We wanted to go see it up close and stuff. And this is a team of 4 horses. Pulling these doubles. That's actually me in the driver's seat. He let me take a picture like that. And actually, as I'm sitting there, I realize this guy's pretty ingenious. He's fertilizing his field at the same time he's fluffing his field. I wonder how much of the fertilizer ends up in the bale. But anyway, so we, okay, let me back up here a second. My belief is the manufacturers are in business to make a profit. They aren't necessarily trying to solve niche market equipment issues. And a couple of months ago, I saw this in a hay magazine, and I just really, really like this quote. As a Sperry New Holland spokesman put it many years ago, you have to have the itch before you know where to scratch. And what he's talking about that I've really come to realize is, unless you really know what you're trying to solve, you can go to a manufacturer, you can talk to their marketing guys, you can talk to their engineers, but if they don't intimately know exactly what you're trying to accomplish or trying to fix, they get distracted. They end up going down the wrong road an awful lot of the time. Imagine your wife is asking you to scratch her back, and so you start scratching her back, and it's like up a little bit, over a little bit, right there, no, down a little bit. Well, you tell an engineer what you're trying to do, and before long, instead of scratching their back, they're scratching their ass. And I don't believe that, I'm not trying to be derogatory. They're great guys, but they don't intimately know what you're trying to do, and eventually they lose focus and they're working on the wrong thing. They're not solving your whole problem. So anyway, this guy here, if anybody happened to recognize this guy or know what he's known for, this guy's known for developing the toothbrush. And if he'd have done that 10, 15 years earlier, maybe we'd be calling it the teeth brush today. But also, it's obvious this guy has the itch, and he knew where to scratch. So anyway, so we started messing around with this idea of a 6-bar reel, hydraulic drive, and so we built several reels and threw them away and built more until we got something that worked the way we wanted it, and we just had this single fluffer. And so I got it working right, and I built 2 more, and I knew a guy up in Michigan, or I knew of a guy in Michigan that had built all kinds of vegetable equipment. He was extremely good at building stuff, and I talked to him about my idea of building a bigger fluffer and more a 6-bar or an 8-bar reel. So we got together, and he started working on the project. I bought that power unit from a dealer in North Dakota and just had it shipped right to him. And he started putting this thing together. And so this is what I'm trying to accomplish here. I'm fluffing my hay. I can do that when the hay is a little bit, it's quite a bit drier than what you want to be doing with a rotary tedder. You want to be in there with a rotary tedder when there's a little bit of dew on it, or it's very tough, or you're losing all your leaves. But with this, it's far more gentle on the hay. So when the hay has more body, a lot of times it's 10 o'clock, maybe even 11 o'clock later in the season that we go out and start fluffing. Now the hay will stand up a little bit better. It's not like a wet noodle falling to the ground. So I can get a lot more air circulation in my hay and yet still maintain the space between the swaths so that when I go to rake my hay, I'm raking it onto that dry ground instead of wet ground if it's completely covered. So I think there's a trade-off between maximizing exposure to the sun and also maximizing air circulation. The other thing about doing something like this, you have a lot bigger window to get the job done. I'm going out at 10 o'clock, maybe even 11 o'clock, and I can fluff all day long because this is far more gentle on the hay. And sometimes we do. I can, with that machine with 13-foot cut, so that's 39 foot, a little less because we're really 12 and a half, but I can get 35 acres an hour with this thing. And sometimes if I'm really up against the weather, I might go back over it a second time. You give it a couple hours and you go back over it, it really stands up even more. So I'm trying to maintain that dry space, and you can kind of see what kind of job it's doing. It's not flinging it all over, and it just fluffs it up. It allows air through it. You think you can't make hay without sunshine, but if you get enough air circulation through your swath, you don't have to have as much sun as you might think you do. I know a guy out in Oregon, 5-6 years ago, they had a major volcano erupt, and they had cloudy weather for weeks. I mean, very cloudy, no sunshine at all for weeks. He said he made the best hay he ever made during that period of time because it was perfectly green. It didn't bleach at all. He had dew in the morning, but the sun didn't come in and bleach it out. So I really think we need to think more about air circulation than we do just exposure to the sun. So I'm just listing some things here that I think are advantages of a fluffer versus a rotary. You maintain the dry space, it's more gentle on the hay and saves leaves, able to fluff when the hay has more body. You have a larger window of opportunity to get the job done, and you have more uniform windrows. If you're not flinging it all over and you have thin spots and light spots, you're raking and baling exactly what that haybine put in that swath. So I feel I get a lot better uniform bale length by doing that, and I feel you have less bleaching. And here, we like our wheel rakes. We really like them. But what I'm trying to show here is you can clearly see that space between the swaths is dry, and you can clearly see that underneath the swath that I just raked the ground is dark yet. It's still black. You lay that windrow in that dark ground. To me, it's like if you get out of the shower and you just drop your towel, your wet towel on the shower floor, it's never going to dry. I mean, it's going to take days to dry on that shower floor. But if you hang it up where it can get some air circulation, it's going to dry. So I'm a firm believer in getting the windrow up and not putting it on wet ground, but save space to have dry ground to put your windrow on. So now I'm going to get a little bit off topic here, but I'm trying to make a point with this. Why is there 12 inches in a foot? 12 inches is a standard number and is used in the 12-hour clock. There are 12 months in a year, 12 inches in a foot, but why use 12 instead of 10? Well, mathematically, I looked this up online. I didn't know this, but I looked this up online. I was just trying to make a point. Mathematically, 12 has more factors and is easier to subdivide as compared to 10. The 12 system of counting was adopted by many cultures, including the Romans, who introduced the idea of 12 inches in a foot. 12 inches can be divided by quarters, thirds, halves. You can't do that in whole numbers. You can't do that with 10. So there's a very good reason why there's 12 inches in a foot. Which brings this up. Why is a small square bale 14 by 18? It's been 14 by 18 forever. But why are we using that size bale? Today, we're shipping most of our stuff, or at least in our part of the country, and I think a lot of you guys are, we're shipping it in van trailers. But a 14 by 18 bale doesn't fit a van trailer very well at all. There's a lot of wasted space if you just go 6 bales wide. And we used to go 6 bales wide, but we would flip 2 flat, and that one, instead of 36 bales per row, we could get 38. But it's a lot of screwing around doing that. It's time consuming. Why don't we make the bale a little bit, bales to fit the size of the trailer? So there's your reason. There is none. I can't come up with any, and I've talked to a lot of guys. I've talked to the manufacturers. Why aren't we switching our bale size? Nobody can really give me a good reason. Why not 13 by 17 and a half? There's barely a visible difference between 13 by 17 and a half as there is 14 by 18. You almost can't even see it. The average customer doesn't see it. And I didn't do it to sell them a smaller bale. I did it to be more efficient and get more bales on the load. So you'll get 27 more bales on a bale wagon load because you're putting 21 on a tier instead of 18. And we use bale stackers, and I know there's plenty of other methods, but this is what we like. And by the way, New Holland bale stackers are pre-programmed in your owner's manual. You can select 21 bale tiers. Nobody makes a bale that fits that. And why did New Holland do that? I believe their engineers, or whoever decided to do all that programming, thought someday we would actually get smart and make a different size bale. So that's some of the things. So that's 14 years ago. We reduced the chambers on all our balers. We had to build new plungers for them. We actually bought kits for them. We had the manufacturer at the time, they engineered a kit for us, and we tried it out, and we converted all our balers. So you actually have to put a new plunger in your baler if you're going to do it the right way, or what I consider the right way. You can reduce your chamber from your plunger back, but for every inch of reduction you want, you have to reduce your chamber by 2 inches. So you're basically shoving that bale through a smaller chamber after it's formed, and you're trying to deform it into a smaller bale. That's really, really hard on a baler. So my opinion is you need to reduce the whole chamber and reduce the plunger size so you're forming the right size bale. So we messed around with different ideas and stuff, and we've been very happy with it. So a 13 by 17 and a half versus a 14 by 18. I'm getting 108 more bales in every trailer, every 53-foot van trailer load. That's a 17% savings in freight. We're shipping a lot of our hay and straw to the East Coast, the Carolinas, Florida. That adds up to a very big number at the end of the year, what we're saving in freight. Our customer has that load shipped to them. They have 108 more bales on that trailer, and they paid the exact same freight rate. That's a big deal if you got a big freight bill. And so this represents 1/2 of our barn storage. This is our home farm. But this is what it's done for our storage space in our barns. Between those 3 barns, which is half, I've gained storage space for 16,000 bales. So between both of our farms, we've gained 32,000 bales of storage. We didn't build another barn, we didn't pave another barn or put electricity in another barn, and we don't pay taxes on another barn. I mean, so these little things can really add up to an awful lot. Then, as we're growing, we have 3 of these commercial balers, and then we have one self-propelled that's like a custom-built baler. And we need to add another baler or 2 to our operation, and I'm really not happy with the balers that we're running. They're very good balers. I guess I won't say the name, but they weigh twice as much as a New Holland, twice as much as a John Deere baler. They're really heavy-built commercial balers. The problem is they were built 40 years ago, or designed, not built, designed 40 years ago, when the typical combine was 15, maybe 20 foot wide. And now we're running more than twice that wide of a grain head, and we're trying to get that big of a windrow through that baler. And it's not doing the job anymore. And at that time, I was paying $65,000 for a new baler, because these were Army tanks. But it still didn't have a wide enough pickup. It didn't have enough capacity. So I'm back to my friend up in Michigan and say, I really want to come up with a better baler. I want to come up with something that has more capacity. I want a lot wider pickup. So we started talking about this, and we're running ideas by each other, and we ended up starting to build this. And by the way, when I started this, I wanted to go pull type until I really liked self-propelled, but I thought we ought to start with pull type in case we failed. And then I talked to him about it, and he keeps wanting to be self-propelled, and I said, well, what if we fail? And he said, the only way you fail is if you give up. And he says, I've never given up. So, okay, he says, I'll tell you, if this thing doesn't work to your satisfaction, you get all your money back. So, I mean, I don't know how you argue with that. So, there we go. We started on it, or he started on it. That's a Krone pickup off of a big baler. It's a John Deere cab, John Deere engine. So this is a dual chamber baler. The plungers are opposing each other, or running opposite each other to help balance it out. We thought, well, after we started running it, one thing we realized is when they're doing this, the baler kind of wants to do this too. And that wasn't a major problem, but with shorter wheelbases we had, you could in the seat, you'd feel the baler doing this. So we realized that really wasn't necessarily the best idea. But anyway, he spent 6 months building this thing. Everything else is built from the ground up. And I'll also mention, he had never worked on a baler before he started this project, didn't know anything about a hay baler. But there's some advantages to that because he could think differently than you or I or other people. This is how a baler works. He was able to come up with ideas that kind of out of the box thinking. So anyway, we get this thing all together, we start testing it, and we just cannot make this thing, it'll bale. I can make bales with it, but it's not double what my other balers were, which is what it needed to be, and it's really not making a quality bale. And we had a major design flaw in the way we were feeding the chambers. It was a big arm that would just go back and forth, taking the hay from the pickup, feeding this chamber, going back, feeding this chamber. But what we had problems with was it was pulling hay out of this chamber as it's going over, and it's just, part of the time, just raking hay back and forth between chamber to chamber. Pretty soon we're plugging it up. We're not making quality bales. And over time, we messed with this thing and messed with it, and eventually we had to come to the realization that we really screwed up. It was a major design flaw, and we just couldn't make it work. So this turned into a very expensive mistake. But we learned a lot from it. And over time, him and I got to be really good friends, and I didn't have the heart to go to him and say, Wayne, you need to give me my money back. I knew I had to have that conversation someday, but I just kept putting it off because we became really good friends, and this is a problem. So anyway, you hear a lot of people talk about being on the cutting edge and stuff, and it's great to be on the cutting edge. I can tell you, if you get too far out on the cutting edge, you're on the bleeding edge. And that's where we were with that thing. So anyway, there it is in the field. And back then when we were doing this, we weren't showing it to anybody. In fact, Clayton Gerald stopped one day and he knew about it, but I wasn't talking about it. And he saw it in the barn, and he started walking over to it, and I said, Clayton, we're not talking about that. He says I wouldn't even let him look at it. I don't remember it that way, but it's like, I'm not talking about this. This is a huge mistake. But anyway, a couple years later, just out of the blue, this guy called me, and he said, John, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be on this side of the dirt, but he says, I have one undone project, and it's your baler, and we need to get that resolved. I either need to give you your money back or we need to start over. And he says, I got some ideas if you're willing to start over. So I listened to what his ideas were, and he had this idea of taking a Heston 1844 three-tie baler, cutting it apart completely new chamber, adding a knotter, new plunger, and a splitter knife in it, and I think we could make something like that work. And neither one of us knew anything about these 1844 balers, but he'd done a lot of research online. Anyway, so we go to a place in southern Ohio, a friend of mine that had one. Him and I drove down there, looked at it, and this baler is a commercial baler. It's heavy built. We really like the design of it, so we decided to try it. And that is in August of that year. I don't remember exactly. I guess it would have been August of 1999, or 2019, I'm sorry. Anyway, so he starts working on this thing, and he bought two of them. On our way back up to my place, from looking at that baler, he called a dealer that he'd already talked to, and he ordered two of them. And he had them in a week, and he completely tore one, I mean 100% apart, started cutting everything in two. I mean, if you looked at this baler, and I think Clayton saw it when it was just 100% all over the shop floor, you think this thing is never, ever going to go back together. The other baler was just to be the model. This is how it's supposed to be, because he doesn't have the experience with this. He's a phenomenal engineer, although it says he barely graduated high school, but he's phenomenal at building stuff. So anyway, this is in, Clayton and I stopped and looked at that in late September. And by January, it's all back together, ready to test it. We go up there, roll out some round bales on the parking lot. There's actually snow on the ground, but they had the snow plowed off so we could roll these round bales out. And it seems to be working. So we end up bringing the baler home a week or so later. I started rolling out round bales in one of my big barns so that we could keep testing it, and it's working. So eventually the snow melted, but ground's frozen, and we start rolling out round bales on some, what we call government ground. It's just strips of grass along ditches and stuff, and just keep working with this thing. And we're tweaking things all the time, trying to get the bales to come out single file, on edge and all this stuff, and we kept tweaking it. And spring came and we started running this thing in the field, and pretty soon we just parked two of our balers because this is reliable. So I let him know, where we're at with this thing. Before I even know it, he orders two more balers, and he starts cutting the second one apart that he already had in his shop. So in the end, he ended up building four balers. We bought three of them, and our neighbor ended up buying one of them. And so here's, let's see, just a little bit of video of this working in the field. This absolutely has double the capacity of our commercial balers or any other two-tie baler. You're forming one bale in essence, splitting it in two, so there's no reason. So that's our baler in the background, and you can see this thing's just walking right past it. And day after day after day, that baler or those balers produce twice what the single balers were producing. So eventually we put a little bit of a YouTube video out on it, and a manufacturer called and wanted to do something with it, or they wanted to come out and look at it and stuff. And by the way, before we even started this, there was another manufacturer that came out and looked at our baler that didn't work. And they were interested in doing something as far as the double baler, and they had heard that we were working on this thing. So they had one of their engineers come out and look at it, and they wanted to start a project. And I was involved with that a little bit from the very beginning, but I came to not believe in the way they were trying to do it. And I may find that I was wrong about that. It sounds like I might have been wrong. But anyway, I didn't believe in how they were trying to accomplish it, so we ended up going this route. I'm trying to think where I was going with that. Anyway, another manufacturer got a hold of us, and we ended up working out an agreement, and we cannot build any more They are working on this, and they've got a couple of prototypes, and I think they're going to have, this last year they had a couple of prototypes in the field, and I believe they'll have more prototypes, but that's not something I can really talk too much about. So anyway, I guess part of my point is, the manufacturers, for the most part, are not going to try to solve your problems. You really have to, if you want to get somewhere, and I'm no rocket scientist at all, but it's a matter of knowing the right people and getting the right people involved and working with them to try to get something accomplished. So anyway, that's kind of it on balers. This is a hay dryer and I didn't have anything to do with building this. We bought this out of Canada, I think 3 years ago, and so all these needles, the bales go into the tall, that's the drying chamber. The needles are injected in it, and they have a whole bunch of holes in it, and it's forcing heated air through the needles, through the bales. Trying to see how much time I have here. I'm still good for a few minutes, Ray? Okay, all right. So anyway, the dryer, so again, I was looking into a dryer 20 years ago, and the guy convinced me not to do it then, and he was absolutely right, 100%. But this dryer had just come out the year earlier, and I was really sold on the concept. I knew a guy that bought 2 of them, and went and saw it, and is like, I think this is a good move for us. So this will dry 63 small square bales in, generally speaking, 20 minutes. And I'm talking about hay that may be from 18 to 23%. And that drying intervals depends an awful lot on how much you're talking about dew moisture or how much stem moisture you have, stuff like that. So it'll dry basically 63 bales in 20 minutes or 188 bales an hour. We get 188 bales in our bale wagon because of the tie tiers. But anyway, you can run them through this. The thing that the guy told me 20 years earlier was, he said, with where energy or costs are going, I don't think dryers are going to be economical in the future. Well, that is one thing I know he was wrong about. Now, I know energy costs have gone up drastically in 20 years, but we're finding, and this by the way, this dryer is 100% self-contained. It has a 500 horse diesel engine that runs a gen set, it runs the hydraulics, it runs 100%. There's nothing off the grid hooked to this dryer, just a diesel fuel tank to run that 500 horse engine. But we figure our energy cost, our fuel cost, is $5 to $7 per ton of hay. So it is meaningless if I can take hay that would otherwise maybe get rained on, and now it's going to be worth twice as much, or it'll be worth half as much if it got rained on. So that has been, for us, a very good investment. But the initial cost of the dryer, today I think that's somewhere around $250,000 to $280,000. So it's not a cheap investment. You've got to have volume to go through it to make it pay. It also, that's in a 66 by 180 foot barn, and I'm using a fourth of that barn just for the dryer. This is all a cooling floor on this end, so when the hay comes out of the drying chamber, that's using 180 to 200 degree air to dry the hay, so that comes off the dryer hot, and it's got ambient air that's going through. You can see the gray plenum there. It's forcing ambient air up through it. So there's about 5 groups of hay on there that are being cooled all the time. So it spends 20 minutes there and then a little over an hour cooling down on the cooling floor. And as it's on the cooling floor, all that air going through it, there's a lot of moisture escaping, or we're getting rid of a lot of moisture also on the cooling floor. But to be able to get to both ends of the dryer, to load it, to unload it, is a quarter of that barn. And then you have to have space in that barn for wet hay. You have to have space in that barn for dry hay. So this thing just about shoots a 66 by 180 barn. So when you look at the barn space it takes, the upfront investment, I'm not ready to buy another one. I'm really happy with that I've got this. But and there's times, I mean, we can bale a large volume of hay. We've had some 15,000, 16,000 bales of hay days, and you can't be baling all that wet and expect it to dry because you'll be there forever. But A lot of times I can start a couple hours early and put it in this barn and run it through the dryer the next day, or I can run a little bit later if we've got a tremendous amount down. And we have baled 10,000 bales and run every bit of it through here, but we have to run 24 hours a day to get it done before it spoils. Ideally, we'd like to have a second one, but it's a major investment and takes up an awful lot of space. So anyway, bale bundling, I'm a strong believer in the bale bundle, but for us, bundling hay in the field just doesn't work. Too much, we would lose way too big of our baling hours if we were putting it in a bundle, because the center bales will spoil if we have much moisture. To me, it's like baling a big bale. So I just will not put hay in a bale bundle in the field, but the customer wants it in a bundle, and it is the future. I have no doubt in my mind bale bundles are the future, but putting them in the bale in the field doesn't work well for us at all because of spoiled bales. So again, back to my friend up in Michigan, we started talking about different ideas on trying to do this. So we're putting so our bale wagons already handle 21 bales in a tier because of the reduced size bale. So we're putting them in here. That's feeding them into the chamber. And by the way, the bundling chamber itself is it's built by Bale Baron. They knew what we wanted to do. He provided us with the chamber itself. So that's Bale Baron's chamber. But we're feeding, with one big plunger, we're feeding 21 bales into that chamber in one shot. It's just like a big plunger, pushing them into the chamber, tying them, and then they come out on this exit table. And this is actually the first generation. We built another one, or we just started with another one a few months ago. And the other one is actually, this thing's 14 foot wide, so it's not easy to move from farm to farm. So we ended up going with build another one. It's 3 foot narrower, and it's got a stacking mechanism. So we're actually stacking them 2 bundles high, and then we can go 3 deep on it. And then we can grab them right off of that 42 at a time and either put them in a trailer or stack them in the barn. But it just made it a lot more efficient for us. So one guy, this is a one-man operation. It takes one person to run this thing. You can feed it, you can take them off. And this thing, the newest one, will actually, it'll actually bundle it faster than we can keep up with it with one machine as far as loading it and unloading it. And that's if the hay's in the same barn that you're bundling it from. So I guess I would just point this out, and I guess I won't say who the manufacturer was, but in talking to their engineers and stuff, we were talking one day, and most inventions or new products are 5% innovation and 95% perspiration. You don't have to be a genius to do this stuff. You just have to put the time in it. You have to be committed to spending the time and not lose interest in it. This stuff doesn't take rocket science. It takes determination to do it. So innovation is just a fancy word for perspiration. And you start talking to the engineers and stuff, and they'll tell you the same thing. It's not rocket science. It's a matter of just sticking with it. I'm done, Ray. If I'm early, that we can do questions. That you tell me what.
Yeah, we've got time for questions. So, John, first of all, big hand for this.
Thank you.
You've heard a lot of great information, ideas that he's applied on his farm, and some of those you may apply, but your real encouragement is for people to think and innovate and do what works for them.
Yes, I don't wait for a manufacturer, because they're probably not gonna, just like this 14 by 18 or reduced size bale. Actually, there are 4 manufacturers now that are working on, somebody put it earlier today, high capacity balers. 3 of them are double balers, and 1 of them is single but very high capacity. One of those is making the reduced size chamber. All of them know about the reduced size chamber and what it would do, but they're afraid to be the one that steps out with that, and they're afraid that if it fails, they lose their job. I mean, all these things have to go, you can't imagine how long it takes them to accomplish something versus somebody like Vogel that built this stuff. I mean, we can do this stuff in months, and it takes them years because they got so many channels to go through, but they're afraid to take a chance on something. Their concern was that that our size bale wouldn't work in the bale baron or the Arcusan accumulator. Well, we had a field day a year ago at our place, and they saw it works perfectly fine. But at the time they made the decision, they were worried about making a mistake.
Question? Somebody raise their hand here. Yes, sir.
John, what moisture percentage of your hay do you usually run with Fluffer?
What moisture in the content? I can't answer that accurately because I'm not out testing it, but here's what I would tell you. Typically, in typical weather, I would cut first thing in the morning, say Monday. Tuesday morning, I go out and fluff it around 10 o'clock, and Wednesday, we rake and bale. That would be pretty typical. Now, later in the year, or if we don't have ideal weather, we turn into the fourth day. And sometimes I'll go out the fourth day. But to tell you that it's 30%, 35%, I'm not testing it to know that. It's at that point, it's all by, I want the dew off of it, and I want the hay to have body to it. If I get out there too early, it's limp like a wet noodle, and it just falls back to the ground and it doesn't stand up. So, and sometimes I do start a little earlier than I want because I got a lot to do. I might come back and do the first 10 or 20 or 30 acres over again because now it'll stand up better. So, but I can't give you a figure on that.
So for the recording, the question was, what moisture does John run his fluffer at? So you heard the answer. Other questions? Another question? Great.
Have you ever run into a scenario where it's dry enough, too dry to run the Fluffer?
Yes, yes.
Question, John.
Okay, have I ever run into a situation where where it's too dry to run the fluffer? Yes, I do. Occasionally I do. A really good, sometimes we'll get extremely low humidity and I gotta be out there and get the job done fairly quickly. A lot of the time, if I'm fluffing, it's because we don't have ideal weather. And by the way, I fluff probably 95% of my hay. Almost every time I decide it's thin enough, I don't need it, I regret it, not doing it. I mean, almost every time. So it's just a habit. We fluff basically everything. Yeah, sometimes I'll go over the first part again just to get it lifted up more because it was a little wetter than what I wanted it to be. And rather than turn around and go back home or whatever, I just start in and I'll go back over a little bit.
Other questions out there?
Yeah, I got it.
Yes.
You said that you didn't bundle out the field because of moisture. The bales will be low.
Yes.
I'm just asking this because I know there's others that are further north of you that are still bundling their hay out the field.
Yep, a lot of people are. A lot. Okay, the question is why I don't bundle in the field when there's others north of me or in my area that bundle in the field. I got to be careful how I answer that because I don't want to criticize the guys that are bundling in the field. What I would say is for me to be comfortable that hay is going to keep in that bundle in the field, the hay is actually too dry and I'm not making that quality of hay. I guess that's the best way I can answer that without, I don't want to say I think they're making a mistake, but
You want a good product to sell, that you know get good money, and that's really the reason
yeah. I don't at all enjoy bundling hay in the winter, running it through this bundler, I can tell you that right now. But the other thing is, almost all of our acreage, so we run about 750 acres of hay, and other than 30, 40 acres, that's all within 2 miles of one of our barns. So we can put that hay in the barn with bale stackers. We run 4 bale stackers. We can put it in the barn really fast, way faster than we ever would with bale barons and with less help. So that's huge for us. I guess that's something I forgot to mention. Because of our weather, I want to get that hay. As soon as I cut it, I want it in the bale just as quick as I possibly can, and in the barn. Way too many times, unpredicted rain hits us, so I want it in the barn really quickly. That bale barn, and I'm not downing a bale barn, but I couldn't possibly do it as fast with that as I could with bale wagons, or I'd have to have a whole lot more help to accomplish that. So for us, in our situation, other guys, if they're hauling it 10, 15 miles, the bale baron's a great tool because you can haul semi-loads at a time instead of 188 on a bale stacker. So it's our situation. So I'm not saying because we're doing it, that's the right thing to do. It's right for us. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are shaking your head on some of the things I'm doing. It's what works for us. And I used to run a protein blaster, a rotary tedder. I don't believe in it anymore, but I ran one for several years and felt there had to be a better way.
One more question. Yes, sir.
What type of hay are you raising?
I should have mentioned that. Orchard alfalfa is predominantly orchard alfalfa. We grow some straight Timothy, and honestly, we've only been doing that for a few years, and we're doing that more for rotation. We grow a couple of 200 or 300 acres of grain a year, and that's really just for rotation for our hay. So mostly what we're baling is orchard alfalfa.
You've got a bit more details on exactly what John's doing on page 12 and 13 in the proceedings. So, John, you'll be around all day, won't you?
Yep.
So, questions you have, grab him at break at lunchtime, follow-up questions. In fact, you've got your contact information in the proceedings here, so feel free to be in touch. Let's give John another big hand.
Thank you.